The opinions expressed in this program are not those of CISA 7 or Time Warner Cable.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, I'll ask Laura McCoy to please read our mission statement.
We educate all students to be college, career, and community ready, inspired to succeed in our diverse world.
Sorry. Also, I do want to say that we had a request after one of our last meetings to provide directions for how to access the handouts for our board meetings. And so did we put there's a paper out there if you want it written, but essentially what you need to do, and actually those who are watching it on TV can access it too after the fact. You go to our district website, which is www.gbaps.org. Click on the Our District across the top toolbar, and then to the left it says Board of Education. Under the Board of Education, you will find a link to agendas and minutes. And this link will take you to a website called Neptune, where all the board agendas, minutes, and handouts from board meetings are housed. And that includes today's meeting, as well as it's archived with our past meetings. The board will now hear comments from members of the public. This is an opportunity for members of the public to share information with the Board of Education. Prior to starting your comments, please provide your name and address. As a reminder, please try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Also, please know that Wisconsin's open meeting law prohibits the board from discussing matters brought during the public participation period of the meeting agenda. If the board would want any additional or clarifying information from you, a member of the administration will be in contact with you to follow up on behalf of the board. At this point, I have 2 people who would like to speak before the board. I'll call them in the order received. First is Judy Crane.
I'm Judy Crane, and I live at 102 Old Alloway Court. And tonight I speak representing the League of Women Voters of Greater Green Bay. The League strongly supports public education, believing in the public responsibility to ensure educational opportunity for all children and young people, and also to strengthen our community and the society. We are very interested in the program called TurboCharge, which, as you all know, has been developed by the Green Bay Public Schools, Northeast Wisconsin Technical College, and the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. The goal of TurboCharge, as we understand it, is to seek college and other post-secondary education and career readiness for every student, and that is extremely important for the students and for the community. TurboCharge can be seen as a promising representation of expanded, smoother, and a more effective integration of pre-K-12 with advanced education so important to our future. The League is extremely proud that the leaders of all 3 of the partnership institutions have agreed to present a program on TurboCharge to the community on Tuesday, September 26th at 7 p.m. And it will take place in the Brown County Central Library. We are very grateful to Superintendent Langenfeld, President Raffin, and Chancellor Miller for their leadership in developing the TurboCharge program and certainly for their willingness to present this program. We hope that the audience on September 26th will include parents as well as people all across the community, including educators on all levels, business people, people who work or volunteer for community services and organizations, community leaders, everyone who cares about the future of us all. So we hope that everyone will help publicize the program and encourage people to attend. With help from the TurboCharge sponsors and with special thanks to Lori Blakesley, the League has prepared publicity materials, including posters and notices that we hope will be distributed widely. I'm leaving a few copies here with Sandy that can be duplicated or adapted. Please let me know of any questions or suggestions that you may have for us. We look forward to December 26th and TurboCharge.
September, right, Judy?
September
26th, okay. I just said December. Oh, I misheard, all right. Thank you, Judy. Next is Elliot Christensen.
Hi, I'm Elliot Christensen. I live in Green Bay. You want an address? I forgot.
Yeah.
1988 Mulberry Lane.
Thank you.
So I did email this all to you guys. So I'm the one who started the petition, and there are 163 signatures on the petition calling for the removal of the superintendent. And I understand that that's not a huge number. I am aware of the volume of people that are afraid to put their name on something like that, and it's a little controversial. And I'm okay taking some of the arrows for that. So I kind of want to, and I did email this to all of you. I have kind of a mind map thing that I'm just going to go through very quickly. I spent most of 3 hours talking to Laura about this a few weeks back, but I'm going to try to smush it down into about 2 minutes. So there are a number of problems at Washington Middle School. We have safety problems for students and faculty, as we've seen. We have students begging and pleading to leave the school. We have teachers who are leaving for other districts. These issues are, there's a whole bunch of causes, and I feel like the causes are a little bit misplaced because these are problems throughout the country, probably throughout the world. They're not just Washington Middle School, and I think we're putting some blame where it doesn't need to be. One thing that I heard receive cheers during one of the meetings was cell phones. I do not believe cell phones are a problem in and of themselves. I think that they are a symptom of some discipline problems, and I recognize and appreciate the need to not have zero tolerance. I understand those sorts of things, but there are some things that we can do and some things that should change. We don't want to lose any more award-winning teachers, and we don't want to lose any more students, not just to other schools in the district, but to other districts, which is a tragedy. I myself went to Green Bay Public Schools. I feel like I'm a relatively well-educated person. All of my kids went to Green Bay Public Schools, and I feel that they're also pretty well educated. My son Max goes to Lombardi Middle School, and I feel like he is doing pretty well there, and I think that the school is okay. So the situation at Washington, I feel, is an emergency type of situation, and it needs some remedies. I know a number of remedies have been brought forth, adding another guidance counselor, replacing some of the missing teachers, hiring another expensive vice principal, and some better defined discipline rules. Those might be all great things, but I think that they fall really short of what needs to happen. And again, I emailed this to you, so I'll go through very quickly, but I do think we need to encourage staff to live locally. I've heard a number of teachers and other staff people who they live in De Pere or they live in Howard Swamico. That may be okay. There may be some need for some waivers for very skilled and qualified individuals to join our staff. We do want the best, but the norm should be for teachers and staff to live in the district. Cell phones should be integrated into class, and where they can't be integrated into class, they should be used as an attendance tool. You have at the front desk, you put all the cell phones down right by the names. Very simple. They don't need to be a distraction. If they're a distraction in the hallways, we need more adult supervision. This is something much cheaper than an expensive vice principal. We can have hall monitors or security guards if need be. These are individuals that do not have to cost that much, and they can bring some greater diversity into our district. They can be of all colors, of all shapes and sizes, and both genders, right? And instead of locking the doors to all of our schools, which I understand is some security theater that we feel like we've needed to do in because of the past, we have the opposite problem right now, where we have apathetic parents who feel it's difficult for themselves to be engaged in our schools, especially in Washington Middle School. In order to volunteer, you have to go through background checks. If you're a parent who's had some discipline problems of your own, background check might seem a little punitive and something you just don't want to expose yourself to. So I would encourage begging and pleading and encouraging parents to be involved in our schools. And finally, the kind of the end thing is we have a perception problem at the very least. So even if the problems are much smaller than I'm stating, or that have been stated by the media or been stated by other people involved with Washington, we do have a perception problem. So immediately, I'm kind of bothered that this meeting is here in the ivory tower of the district offices instead of at Washington Middle School. This meeting should be at Washington Middle School until the problems are fixed. We have problems, we need to address them, we can't ignore them, and we need to treat them with the seriousness that they have. I understand you can't ask me any questions, I really wish you could, but that's all I got.
Actually, I do have a question. We can't ask questions. We
Oh.
just can't have a conversation.
So you get to ask, I can't answer.
No, it's a definition. Just a minute.
Yeah.
Oh, and actually, you have move SI office to WMS.
Superintendent.
Oh, okay.
SI.
Got
Or
it,
Sports
got it,
Illustrated, either
got it.
office
All
is
right.
fine.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your comments. All right, is there anyone else who would like to speak before the board? Seeing none, we will move to our roll call. Sandy?
Here.
Oh. Is he excused? Anyway, he's not here. I don't,
Danch?
Here.
Maloney?
Here.
McCoy?
Here.
Wagner?
Here.
Warren?
here.
Sinclair? Here.
Can you clarify? Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Katie. All right, we have 6 board members present. Also at the table, joining us, to my left, Dr. Michelle Langenfeld, our superintendent. To my right is Grace Sinclair, our Intercity Student Council president from Preble High School. And to my left is Sandy Heller, our board secretary. I would entertain a motion to approve the following minutes. Regular board meeting, July 17th, 2017. Special board meetings, August 2nd, number 1, August 2nd, number 2, August 7th, 2017, August 15th, 2017. Special board meetings, closed sessions, July 17th, 2017, July 27th, 2017, August 2nd, and August 2nd and August 7th, 2017. Is there a motion?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The minutes are approved. Next is the superintendent's update. I will turn that over to Dr. Langenfeld.
Thank you, Dr. Warren. I'd like to begin with the calendar for the month of August and early September, into September. Special board meeting this week, data retreat, beginning at 9 o'clock, right here in room 331. Then we move into September, where Labor Day, we're closed on September 4th across the district. Then September 5th, we welcome our students. It's the first day of school for students. Then September 11th is our teaching and learning work session meeting at 5:30, immediately followed by the organizational support work session right here in the boardroom as well. And then on September 18th is our regular board meeting at 5:30. So that is the calendar upcoming here shortly. And I have a success story that actually is a really important success story. Our district's graduation rates are increasing and quite largely in certain categories. Overall, as a district, we increased this last year by 4.4%. Actually, it was a year, we lag a year, so it's a year before that. Wisconsin, the state, actually is declining slightly. So the total number of graduates we had this last, in 15-16 was 1,186. And I think what's really important is to recognize, and I'd like to acknowledge, the hard work on the part of many to get us here. When I look at the various categories, I think of the hard work of staff and administrators in particular, who have really been working hard with their school improvement plans using high leverage strategies. And I think over these last several years, with the course essential documents in hand and the universal curriculum being delivered across all of our schools across the district, and this year having the multi-level systems of support and academics and the interventions and supports, we're seeing some significant shifts. And I think that that's a celebration, and our staff and administration and teams working tirelessly should be commended for that. I also know that schools can't do it alone, and much of the support that's going on in our schools provides for extended learning for our students. And so I want to thank all of our community partners who extend the learning for our kids, every group from our higher ed partners who offer supports throughout our schools, and also to our community partners, different programs specifically focused on graduation. Because we know that at the end of the day, our mission is to educate every child every day to be college, career, and community ready, inspired to succeed in our diverse world. I also want to do a shout out to the Academy and the hard work of those teachers and staff who work tirelessly to address the needs of students who may not have had the experience of graduation over these last several years. This particular data reflects the first group of Academy students who went through, and as you recall, we had 63 students enrolled, students who came to us who were very credit deficit at the time, but were very successful, and out of that 63, 59 graduated. And then the program expanded and moved to East High School, and this year we graduated more than 200 students out of that program. So my confidence of the work that people are doing with the universal curriculum and the multi-level systems of support, coupled with our community partners and our alternative pathways to student success, whether it be Baylink Manufacturing, City Stadium Automotive, has really started to really shift that dial. And I would encourage everyone to go out and look specifically. Certain student groups were actually in double digits in terms of increase in their graduation rates, and we anticipate and expect this trajectory to continue. So that's my success story, but it isn't mine, it's our story to share.
Question, if I may. Did I hear you say that the state graduation rate was actually going down a little bit?
It declined slightly.
It declined slightly, while ours went up. A comment, if I may, to Republic in particular. Sometimes people say, well, why don't you have double-digit increase in graduation or whatnot? Let me sort of equate it to those of us like myself who have been on diets more than once. The last couple pounds are the hardest to lose, and that's sort of what we have when we have a very high graduation rate to begin with. Try and get those remaining kids to walk across and receive that diploma are some of the harder youngsters to work with. And our district, as the superintendent has indicated, has been working very diligently at that and making very good progress. Thank you. Thank you to our staff.
You know, I looked at the data, and some of our student groups, actually, I'm looking at our English language learners, and I know that those folks have really been working hard to make sure that the students not only get the English, but also the content, and they increased graduation percentages by 12.7%. And that's a very large increase, whereas the state, it looks like 3.2. So we're outpacing the state, and that's really what we need to do to get where we need to be to close those gaps. So a lot of hard work, and we anticipate continued success in this area as we continue to afford students various pathways and opportunities and supports.
I do also just want to, the English language learner, I want to point out, because people, and I've talked to people, they're confused. The English language learner data are reflective of students who are in high school and still in the English language learner program. So we have thousands of children that go through our English language learner program and graduate, and they are no longer included in that number. It's only the active ELL students. So if people are looking at the N in those charts, that N looks very low because we don't have huge numbers of ELL students once they get to high school, but we do have some, and as Dr. Langenfeld said, it's quite an achievement to have them graduate because they're learning very high-level academic content while they're learning their second language at the same time. So I know they've been working really hard at that.
Just one more point is that we also have students who choose not to graduate. Our special needs students, for example, can stay until they're 21. So, and many of our English language learners also stay longer because it takes them a little bit longer. So we also look at 6 years and 5 years to see how our students are doing. So that coupled with our probably greatest challenge of our mobile population of students moving in and out, we're just very pleased with the progress, but we know that we have a lot more work to do. But very thankful to everyone involved who has really made this a reality from the time those children walked in the door as students in the Green Bay Area Public Schools.
All right, thank you, Dr. Langenfeld. Next, we'll go to our monitoring reports, and that'll be facilitated by Laura McCoy.
I believe we're going to be hearing about the Gifted and Talented program.
Thank you for having us, and I have Nancy Chartier with us, our Executive Director of Elementary Teaching and Learning. And before we begin, I just want to set the stage a little bit. Our Teaching and Learning Department has taken over in a state of transition the Gifted and Talented programming this year. But even prior to that, there was significant work being done around assessing what were some of the issues that the program was facing, and what were some of the concerns that were out there on the stakeholders within the program, both parents and students, and thinking of teacher need as well. The work that was begun as far as examining those issues began in the fall of 2015, and then afterwards in the winter of 2016 there were some additional parent concerns that came forward, but actually many of the parent concerns aligned with some of the same questions we had as far as pieces related to student placement and assessment, related to servicing, related to transition in and out of programming based on a single test score. And we think that the recommendations that we have answer nearly all of the questions that were raised by parents. Of course, there are different facets that we want to address as well. But it's important for us to listen to our most important stakeholders, our parents as customers, as well as their students. Related to this, there was one piece related to disbanding gifted and talented programming altogether. That was something we're not moving forward at this point, but I think the other questions that were brought forward to the board and to others are things that we're already working to address. It is a work in progress, however, so this represents substantial efforts to move forward, but we are not completely changing everything with 1 year of transitional authority. There are different things that we'll be continuing to develop over time, including a very important handbook that we'll be putting together over the course of this next year. But I think that you'll be impressed with the pieces that we have moving forward and how they will impact our most talented and gifted students.
Thank you, Mr. Mays, and thank you very much for the opportunity to address our gifted and talented program in the district. Our presentation tonight will really be addressing the perimeters for the gifted and talented program as defined by the Wisconsin state statutes, the Department of Public Instruction administrative rule, and in our school districts, our local must, our dues, often defined by Standard T, that outlines what district school boards are responsible for. We'll also take a real brief look at our back past as our history of GT has been, GT programming in the Green Bay Area Public School District was clearly not only informational, but it really provided us the much needed detail of what was tried and the results of what was tried as we moved the program forward. And we'll take a look, as Mr. Magus was saying, at this year's past. We'll be taking a look at this year's past recommendations of key revisions for this upcoming year, and also to share with you the timeline of what you can expect from us and the work we'll be doing behind the scenes as a collective team as we move forward. I'd like to begin with a definition, the who. So as we explore the gifted and talented program, it's very important that all of us share a common definition of the population of students that were responsible for meeting their unique learning needs. So the state of Wisconsin does define what a gifted and talented pupil is, and who give evidence of a performance and capability in intellectual, creative, artistic, leadership, specific academic areas, and whose needs and services or activities are not ordinarily provided in a regular school program, or in order to fulfill and develop such capabilities. There's some very important key legislative guidance for schools. Each school district shall establish a plan, and Mr. Magnus was actually alluding to that. By the end of October, our team believes that we'll have a written plan in the stage one of, that it will be what we will bring and want to operate on for this coming year as we make additional changes and revisions. But we will be bringing that forward. And also the department, under the administrative rule, the district must assign someone in the district who's responsible for coordinating a gifted and talented program. Gifted and talented pupils shall be identified through kindergarten through grade 12 in all of the areas as I had mentioned above previously, in the areas of general intellectual, specific academics, leadership, creativity, and the visual and performing arts.
And so just to clarify, the district designated, beginning this year, I was the person as the main designee, but then as my designees for executive secondary and elementary teaching and learning, Nancy Chartier and Mike Fries were the ones that were holding on to that. Our rationale behind that was making sure that the gifted and talented services and programming was an integral part of how we served all kids, that it wasn't seen as a complete standalone, but rather an avenue for supporting all kids.
A little more along the legal guidance. Pupils may be identified as gifted and talented in one or more areas, and also across multiple departments. Special needs students also are identified if they meet the criteria for gifted services, often known as twice exceptional. The school district board must provide access without charge, so all students within our gifted programming qualifying, we do not charge for any of the services we provide. And the district shall provide an opportunity for parental participation in the identification and the resultant programming. I think that's very important, keeping it to the forefront as we move forward. That's the who and the why we are, and the work that we will be doing. But it's also important for us to take that look at our past. Prior to 2013, Green Bay Area Public Schools provided a district-wide program that addressed the learning needs of students in our schools in a variety of ways, from inclusionary practices to acceleration of grade level. Teams of GT staff members and administrators began taking a look at the equity in our identification process as early as 2010. And in 2013, the district opened a school within a school gifted program located at Langlade Elementary. A population of gifted students from various schools, district schools, received their gifted and talented services in an all-inclusive program in one location. And additionally, the gifted talented students also received services in a variety of ways. And examples of those services may have looked like our GTRTs, our gifted and talented resource teachers, modeling in the classroom, leading small group instruction, pulling students out, extending services to students, to whole grade acceleration, subject acceleration, online options, youth options, concurrent enrollment programs, and independent study, just to name a few. We also offered at the time and continue to offer outside activities such as a math quiz bowl, a destination imagination, and there are many, many more. Due to the growing number of students in limited educational space, in 2014-15, the district opened the Da Vinci School for Gifted Learners. The opening of this customized educational option allowed for the GT program to expand. Along with the offering of Leonardo da Vinci Gifted Learners, the district continued to serve the model GT program. This is very important. We continued to serve a service model GT program, and we'll get into the importance of that versus where we're going in just one moment. It offered many options previously mentioned. The model included 3 rotations, so groups of students would come. So September, there'd be a group of students, and then they'd return, and then a new group would come in November, and then a new group of students would come in February. For much of our elementary program, our high school and middle school programs were really much different than that, as they're often use the system, the secondary system that's in place to advance the learner and the pathways for individual student learning. And in 2015, an internal audit was completed on the GT program, and it identified defining a purpose for a gifted and talented. It also determined that the definition for gifted and talented in our district, and what would GT look like in the Green Bay Area Public School District, bless you. Also to create an identification process and develop a service model and consideration for a universal model. In the fall of 2015, Scott Peters, a GT guru out of Whitewater, University of Whitewater, was hired to guide various district stakeholders through a process of adjusting our current practices and identification methods through the service model. Additional work was also led by Mr. Peters, Dr. Peters, facilitating the discussion and the decision points. The need for a universal screener was explored in depth, as well as options for screening for gifted and talented, and also a definition for gifted education in Green Bay Area Public School District. In October of 2016, Sarah Lang worked, and our gifted and talented resource teachers worked very closely with us. Started out with a 2-hour overview of all of this wonderful work that has been laid before us as part of the transitioning to the teaching and learning department. And in 2016-17, they would then transition from a service model into an identification model or a universal model of gifted education. It was also determined at that time, over the past year, that we would be using the multi-level systems of support framework for learning to provide the structure of consistency across our district and across all schools. We worked collaboratively with Sarah Lang, and thank her very much for her guidance as we did transition this year throughout the 16 and 17 school year to transition the gifted program to the teaching and learning department. So the work that we bring forward is just a step moving forward, but much of the foundation of this work has been set for us to now accelerate and to ensure that there's consistency across our district. So the key revisions that we'd like to bring forward for you tonight are 5 system pieces: the systems of operation, a universal ability screener, identification process, communication, and program accountability. Those will be the 5 areas in which I'd like to take this just a few more moments to go a little bit deeper in each of those areas. The first, why a system of operation? Well, a system of operation provides a learning framework that is consistent, it's predictable, and it's responsive to student learning needs as measured by various assessments. We are very fortunate in our district to have a system in place, a multi-level systems of support for board members who once served our district as building principals, very much like it's the framework in which you run your school, to ensure that all children have equal access to what it is they need to be successful. There is a plan for different tiers of intervention, a called-out universal, and structure for meeting teams and reviewing multiple pieces of data and making programming decisions that best meet individual students' needs. We also, in the multi-level systems of support, which I'll be addressing in just one moment, will be developing personal learning plans for all of our gifted learners. In the past, they had differentiated learning plans, and as a collective team, the gifted and talented resource teachers and teaching and learning worked this summer and felt they wanted to very much have all of our student information in one place so that principals and teachers servicing children have access to what it is exactly that child needs. Using your system to educate your children. The next piece, in 2016, as we reviewed the board meeting, it was asked of us to bring forward a universal screener. And so we spent the past year looking at, and I might add, when Dr. Peters was here, they also looked at the universal screeners, both the Neglieri and the COGAT. And the COGAT is a cognitive ability test. I'm sorry for the acronym. The universal screener, it's a comparison of the ability of the student, the innate ability the student has, and the achievement. And it is also used in district as a proactive measure to look for gifted students throughout your district that we used to call it, might just be sleepers. And they're out there. It's just a way of finding those children that you know could thrive through a very productive program like Gifted and Talented. We have made some decisions to bring forward to administer the COGAT at second grade. We did pilot this and thank the Howe teachers and principal and leadership over there to make sure that operationally we could even feasibly give a screener. Why COGAT? Well, we chose the COGAT because we could give it online, and there are 3 components to the COGAT. And then I'm sensing I might get this question, so I'm going to jump to the answer. 30 to 45 minutes per section of the test is what we will require. It's done online. And then depending upon the proctor of the exam, from 2 to 3 hours. And as we set the parameters for how we'll be administering this, that work is going to be done as early as September 6th, where Stephen Miller will be joining us and walking us through the protocols and how this will be administered to all our second grade students in November. Also, all our current gifted and talented students who have incomplete data records will be given the COGAT. So if they come to us and perhaps don't have a Neglieri or an ability test, that will be a requirement to be in gifted education. We won't be stopping a program to start a program. We will be transitioning, bringing our records up to date, still providing services, but gathering the information for decision making as we need. So children who are currently being seen in the gifted program this year will continue to receive the gifted services. And as the new children board on or are referred by parents or teachers, then we will begin the new process that I will be bringing forward. But those children that are in gifted education right now will then just be transitioned in. We'll review their portfolio, and if there are any assessments that are missing, we'll make sure that we have a complete portfolio for them.
I'm sorry, Nancy.
Yes.
The name of that other screener,
Neglieri?
spell that for me, please. I can never remember it. Is it Neglieri?
Yes.
Okay, I was thinking it was a, okay.
Yes.
N-A-G-L-I-E. Yeah.
There you go.
But we did take some considerable amount of time in reviewing these because we wanted to make sure that we were making the absolute best choice. We look at this as an important tool for equity and making sure that every student that has great potential, all students have great potential, but the ones that have differing gifted and talented abilities, that we're not identifying them just because, you know, a parent might be bringing a name forward, or that they've been to lots of field trips and they have background knowledge on certain things, but that we're truly looking for the ability of the student and their potential. So we wanted to make sure that it was an equity builder as well as just a identification screener tool.
And we are currently using the Neglieri at Leonardo da Vinci at paper pencil. And we've found that would be an undoable task to have all of our GTRTs and support hand scoring all of the assessments. So we look to find an assessment tool that could be taken online. And with our timeline, this is the decision, or this is the direction that the team had chosen to go. And we looked at this at a very intense level for 3 months before landing on the COGAT versus the Neglieri, and including conferences, phone calls with others who have been affiliated with the gifted program in the past.
Will Da Vinci discontinue use of the Neglieri then?
It's my understanding in my brief conversation, and that would be a better question for the principal, but it's my understanding that she's not opposed to giving them both. So I believe that at this time they're going to be continuing using the Neglieri and hand scoring, whereas the district screener will be using an online ability test. If we dig in.
I don't understand why, but.
They use that for admission into the school, is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, they use that plus
One data.
multiple other,
Yes.
right, okay.
And I think it's fair to say that for the purposes of the work that lies before us, the immediate work, we were very much focusing on meeting gifted and talented students' needs at the universal level. And what we often see is a Tier 2 intervention or a Tier 3, thinking an intervention or a placement such as Da Vinci has a very, it's over a longer period of, sustainable period of time, and a very different curriculum, delivery of curriculum, than you would find in one of our schools or one of our schools' programs. I believe that Da Vinci to come and talk about their school individually would be the ideal place to really dig in and find out about exactly the components of Da Vinci. But for our work in front of us, and our call to urgency is really the universal, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, thinking as Da Vinci as a significantly different curriculum and significantly different placement, where children often go for multiple years. Okay.
If I could just, does the COGAT and the Neglieri, are they identifying the same kids? Are they pretty?
Fairly similar. There are some slight differences between the two, and that's why we took some time to review and look at what were some of the findings out there as far as their utility as a tool, and that's why we ended up choosing the COGAT, both for the online capability, and then there were some other criteria related to identification that we felt it fit the needs better than we felt the Neglieri would do, and so that's why we did a pilot with it as well to see how it actually functioned as a field test at how, and it met the needs from our perspective at this point, where we wanted to pursue a larger application.
Just as a follow-up to that too, so you've talked about how they're the same because they're both screeners for
Their
gifted and
ability.
talented.
Absolutely.
And their ability. Can you just, for people who may not know a lot about either one, how there are just some really important differences between the two screeners? How they're the same and how they're different?
I will have Stephen Miller come up and explain.
Okay. And I
In
thought
assessment language.
high
so that I
level.
don't speak.
One measures this, one measures that. What does it look like?
Basically, we'll measure the same. It's just. a
Very
different
similar,
assessment. Yes.
but there were some slight differences that
Yeah.
had made us choose the COGAT.
The main differences between the COGAT and the Neglieri, the COGAT allows you to give both a screening form and a placement form. So that was one of the advantages in looking at the COGAT, is we could give a shorter screening tool, and then we could give a follow-up placement tool if there was a placement decision that we were looking at. The NNAT or the Neglieri.
Placement as far.
Placement and gifted and talented. for gifted and talented services, if that's the direction we decide to go. The Niglieri also includes a nonverbal component. The COGAT includes a nonverbal, a verbal, and a quantitative. And so it allowed us to cast a little bit wider net when we were looking at identifying students. So those were the main considerations that we looked at when we looked at the COGAT. One was that we could give it as a screener, which was a slightly shorter version than the Niglieri. The other was that it screened in some other areas that the Niglieri didn't screen for. Other questions about differences?
Well, some in general, if I may, perhaps let's bring this up anyway. In terms of, I guess I'd like a simple definition for universal screener. I think universal screener, that term, most people would see and think that's referring to a person that's going to be giving screening, will be doing screening. And also, we talked about in second grade doing this online. And if so, how comfortable are you that all our second graders can actually do it online? Also, how will you be addressing, and perhaps you alluded to this, Mr. Miller, how will you be addressing those youngsters that aren't that fluent in English? So two things there, not
Yep.
fluent in English and or not comfortable with computers, shall we say.
So I'll take the second part of the question first, which is students who are non-English speakers. They do have a Spanish version, which we were also able to pilot at Howe, and we found that we had some success administering the Spanish language version. Those are the only two language versions that are available for the COGAT or the Niglieri, so there really wasn't much discrepancy there. As far as the students being able to take the test online, what we did find, because of the length of the screener, it includes 3 components. We learned through our piloting process that it was best to give the kids a wiggle break after taking 2 sections. And so before they would take that 3rd section, they could take a break and actually stretch out or walk around or plan the doodle pad. They did have a doodle pad that you could do in between sessions, but just something to give the kids a little mental break. One of the things that we will explore when we have further conversations about this in September is the idea of administering over 2 days, as opposed to just trying to do it in one sitting with kids. That's one thing that you can do with the COGAT, is you could spread it out over multiple days.
May I add a couple more comments? You know, it would seem to me, since you're looking at doing this in November, there could be activities prior to that time on computers for kids to get comfortable with that particular format. You said there's a Spanish version. Okay, that helps there. But we do have a lot of the languages, a lot of people from other countries. And it seems to me many of those, I would argue that many of the refugees that have come over are probably some of the brighter people because they figure out how in the heck to get here through a very complicated system. So I would hope we would not lose sight of how do we tap into those youngsters that may be gifted and talented.
I agree, and that's a really important piece close to my heart as well. As a former ELL teacher, we want to make sure that it's reaching as many people as possible. The aspects that it has, where it's not just looking at the linguistic testing, where it's also looking at math and other areas, that doesn't completely address that concern, but it makes it a little more broad than something that is just a language assessment piece. So that's one factor. But really, our commitment to this long term is continuing to develop ways that we can most equitably identify as many students as possible that benefit from specific instruction. So we want to make sure that we're not over-identifying or we're not misidentifying, but we're really making sure that we're tapping into the students that we might be missing at this point.
And one of the benefits of administering the COGAT, as John kind of alluded to, is that we can cast a little bit broader net. So, and it does have a nonverbal component, but it also has the quantitative and the verbal, so we can capture as many students as possible. And one of the things we would hope is that we could look at scores. We do get scores in each of the 3 areas in addition to a composite score. So one of the things that could be done, especially for our English language learners, is to look at those nonverbal scores specifically, because there's not a heavy language focus in that area.
The nonverbal portion, I was going to say this for later, but since we're talking about screening, When I looked at the COGAT, it looked primarily to have an intellectual focus, but my question was going to be, what about creativity, artistic ability, leadership? How are we screening for that? I mean, is that what that nonverbal portion is? I mean, how are we accommodating those requirements,
Yeah.
because they're requirements?
You bet. And I'm going to let Nancy address those, because those are not issues that we could get at through the COGAT, because it is an ability screener. We're not able to screen for some of those other areas you identified, like artistic or leadership. And I know that Nancy has been working on ways in which we could screen for those as well.
Absolutely, thank
Are
you.
there any other questions I can answer with regards to the COGAT?
Would you just please address the universal screener?
So,
The verbiage of
What
what
is
do
a
we mean by
universal screener?
universal screener?
no, universal means everybody. Right?
So every second grader in our district would be provided the opportunity to take this screener. And so that's what we mean when we have universal. When we give a universal test, it would be for a population of students that all of them take it. That's usually the terminology we use.
Our goal will be to administer it to all second grade students. There will be, obviously, we know that we will encounter some situations where we have students who have intellectual disabilities, or their language capacity is just so low that we can't even get them through the instructions on the test. But our goal is going to be to administer the COGAT to as many second grade students as possible in November.
And what we'd really be looking for there is the ability the student has and the achievement in which if there's a discrepancy between the two. And so, and keeping in mind, this is just a screener. We used to say it's just getting the big boulders out, telling us we need more information. In my presentation, when we get into the multiple assessments this evening, I'll be addressing the importance of all those different assessments.
Go ahead, Katie.
And someone who comes into our district as a third grader and beyond, where are they? I was little in first graders and kindergartners.
Thank you. New students to our district that come to us from another district have already been identified or are referred by a teacher, or after reviewing their records as they come in, will be given the screener also, regardless of their grade.
So it's appropriate for older students as well?
Yes, in fact, we piloted the COGAT at sixth grade also. We had one time thought, should we try have a secondary as well as an elementary? We're not totally ruling that out, but we also have to respect the capacity of our employees and what we can do at this time as we move forward. What information would that give us that we can't capture in our other assessments? But if any time they feel that this assessment is needed, it can certainly be given.
And it's really about the trade-off of instructional time versus assessment time. So, the needs of the staff too, but we want to make sure that we're thinking about not impacting the instructional time more than needed. So with the universal screener, the COGAT was the better of the two. They're the two main ones that are the main universal screeners for intellectual ability and cognitive ability, and we felt that the COGAT was by far the better choice for us at this time.
And the screener is, as Mr. Dorff had mentioned, it is absolutely for intellectual. The measure of intellectual, and the other components of gifted, there will be additional assessments given to those students. And but our focus for this purpose of moving forward and moving our program forward is our academics and our intellectual, with our eye on our other areas of giftedness and what might lie ahead as we use our entire system to meet the needs of our gifted learners in all those other areas. The identification process, as state statute and administrative rule is so clearly outlined for us, we will be administering multiple assessments, so students who are screened and indicators that we call those orange flags, that they need additional assessment, then we would then start our battery of assessments. There's no one assessment that you can give a child that's going to give you a definitive answer of the full picture of the child. So the test won't provide, even the COGAT, your formative assessments, there's not one assessment that gives you every aspect of the child's learning and needs. So it's important that we have multiple assessments. Each assessment will also have an observation surveys that provides very important information. A survey that a parent would fill out. We redesigned our forms that have identified characteristics of gifted students, and we ask parents then to rate how often they see these behaviors in their child and then add any additional information. The survey is very much the same as for our teachers to do the same, so that we can gather that information of behaviors that a parent notices as well as behaviors that we're seeing in our classrooms. And it is really that balance of information that we have to consider before we identify or provide any placement. So the importance of that assessment piece first.
Question, if I may, just so I have a clear understanding. The universal assessment in second grade, if a youngster does not do well over there, that can be overridden by parent and teacher input so that youngster is looked at further.
Thank you.
Is that correct?
You're exactly correct. There will be, but this is how it remains consistent. You always give the child the benefit of the doubt of the assessment they did best on, because your intent is to help the child to learn. And so every assessment given to the children will have a baseline. And so you would take multiple points of baseline assessment. Perhaps the student didn't feel well on the screener. You could re-administer that screener to the child. You could give the full battery of the COGAT to that child, which we will most likely be doing for children and through the identification process. Those that indicate that there's an orange flag or a red flag, that this child probably would be a candidate for giftedness in the area of intellectual, then we would provide that opportunity. But each of the assessments that we bring forward will have baseline data. Now, I don't mean that the parent observation or survey or the teacher observation or survey will have a scored rubric that would go through or with it, but you will have a portfolio from the classroom. You'll have your state assessments. You'll have your district assessments, all to take into consideration, and then a learning support team of professionals around a table, the principal, the classroom teacher, the area of giftedness, if it's math, more knowledgeable math supports in your school, and your gifted resource teacher will make the decision along with the parent if this is what they believe is best for this child.
Okay, thank you. Might I ask a couple more questions? So let's say we're beyond, that sounds like it's the package in second grade. We're going to have the universal screening instrument. We're going to get input from the parents, from the teachers, and sit down and look at the youngsters. Okay. After second grade, will there be some way that teachers and parents will know that if they at all feel that their youngster might be GT or need GT services, that there's someplace they can go and initiate that?
Yes, I'm sorry I didn't make that clear.
Sure.
This will be the process for every child that is being referred for gifted services. So a parent makes a referral, they will be given the whole battery of assessments. First the screener, and then if that indicates they need additional assessments, then that child will be given the additional assessments.
My child's in fourth grade.
Yes.
He has already had the screening in second grade, but that screening didn't, and other things didn't kick him forward into the GT services. But now I'm seeing some things with my child, son, who's a late bloomer, and would he be taking that universal screening again? Or just these, are there other means to determine if I'm correct in my feelings about my child?
I would believe that would be a decision point that is decided upon with the team, and I'm not trying to be evasive here, but depending on the child's age, how long ago did he take or she take the screener, it might not be necessary. They could go right into the full battery of the COGAT to give even more information since the child has already had the screener. So those are the decision points that will be in the written plan, but a team of teachers and professionals along with the parent, because the parent input to this would be, these are the significant changes I see in my son or daughter at this time, that we will want to dig more deeply into and use all of the assessments we have at our available to us to learn as much as we can about that child and their stage of learning. And at that time, absolutely, they could qualify. Any other questions? And we're going to dig into these wonderful multiple assessments. The package that we will be providing, as outlined in a state statute, but also in best practice, is we will be using a screener for, once again, for our second grade district-wide, any new students coming to the district, any pre-existing gifted students who have not had the Neglieri administered or feel that they would like additional information about their learning. There will also be the ability, formative assessments that would be giving, and our district will be giving the STAR assessment 3 times a year. We will use the 3 times a year assessments as the information. It won't be given and administered just as a part of the gift package. We will be using past assessments, forward exam, any normed assessment that we may have in the child's repertoire, we would definitely consider as part of this child's evidence of the ability the child has. I'm sorry, that would be the COGAT, that's the achievement. I just totally blew that. The ability would be the COGAT and the full battery of COGAT to know what are they able of doing. The achievement, the STAR, the forward exam, that's what are they achieving compared to what they're capable of doing. And that's very critical. And then you bring in your components of your classroom performance, you bring in your parent observation, your teacher observation, and any other relevant information you have about that child to make this very important decision.
So if their advanced achievement is matching their ability, it may mean that they're still well placed within a regular classroom, because their learning is still being maximized in that environment. But it may, where that difference shows, if somebody is not achieving according to their ability, that shows that we might want to have some sort of modification with the classroom or different way of challenging the student, or it could mean a different intervention or placement.
Please.
Julie.
Nancy, so the STAR test, say the STAR tested, and they're given it 3 times that year, a child, that doesn't mean they're pulled in and out of the gifted and talented.
No.
They're maintained in that gifted and talented. Is that different than what had happened in the past?
It's
Yes,
very different.
it's very
and
different.
that was one of the key pieces that we felt was it was not an intentional disservice to kids, but it was a disservice to kids because there was a desire to respond in real time to where students were performing, which was meant with good intention, but it was creating situations where students were sometimes identified and then told that they weren't qualifying anymore, so students were in and out of programming. I've seen that in a variety of school districts as well as a parent, and I think that can be a frustrating situation for both the parent and child if they're told that they're gifted and talented one year and then the next year they don't qualify. We want to make sure that we're addressing that, and we actually have more information in a later slide.
And even within
I
this.
just want to follow on that question too, just a little bit of a follow-up. Because we're all aware of a particular situation, obviously, but was that system-wide, that practice, or was that localized just to a couple? So that was system-wide across the district? Kids
That was a system-wide practice.
pushed in and pulled out on the basis
Yes.
of where they were at the start.
And
start
actually,
assessment.
a fairly common practice in other districts too, unfortunately, so.
And that's a type of gifted services. It's called a service model. So you would have children moving in and out in September. You'd take a group for like 1 trimester, then they'd go back into the classroom. A new group of students perhaps would be the next. So you'd have 3 rotations, and that was our model. And like all good districts, when they look at their program and realize that we're really meeting the needs of all of our learners, and is this really beneficial to meeting a gifted learner who is gifted? You're not gifted today and not gifted tomorrow, but gifted all through their educational experience.
So it's water over the dam, but was the error in that we were attaching a label to the children and saying that, today you're gifted and tomorrow you're not, as opposed to just saying, right now we recognize the need for you to have additional support, and once we've reached that, we're back to the universal.
I think some of both, really. I mean, I think part of it was the damage from the label and then the delabeling of a student. If you're told that you're highly capable one year and then the next year you receive maybe you don't even receive a letter, you just aren't identified, that can be a challenging situation for a student. But really, I think it comes down to making sure that we're improving that system over time. And right now, with our current structure, we are not going to put students in and take students out of programming. Programming models may change over time so that we serve kids in different ways, and maybe it's more of an intervention system than an actual pull-out program because of the resources and what's considered best practice. But we will not be pulling students out of GT services after they've been identified. Unless
and also our assessment of the gifted students was different than it is now too.
Yes.
So we were just using what the state test and STAR test
For the most part, yes.
Yeah.
From
Which
our
is-
history and the records that we could uncover, the 95th percentile.
Right.
Which lends you to question, because that percentile can change.
Right.
And so, to use the norm curve equivalency would probably be even a better measure using our STAR. So the district's assessment of STAR may be percentile or maybe norm curved equivalence. But I believe as we set our decision points for gifted, we'll be looking at that norm curved.
And then you're also pulling in more,
All these
other
others.
things, which we didn't have before, which is
Yes.
probably the reason they'd go in and out. This comprehensive assessment system, I think, pulls the kids in that are gifted, and then you can be confident moving forward that they are the ones that need the gifted
Yes.
services.
I don't know if either of you can, how long were we doing it that way? It just seems like such an odd way to do things, to say
have
that
no idea.
today you're gifted, tomorrow you're not. It just is kind of astounding to me
I'm
that
not
we're
sure
doing
how
that.
long we've been doing it, but I do know that
We have one principal.
6 years ago, my son in a different district was identified in a similar manner and then de-identified, and it was, he was okay with it, but he had some questions like, what does this mean? How come and I don't mean to call that as an example, but just to know that in other districts in the area that occurs as well. It's something we identified really early on in 2015 as being something that needed to change. Another piece, there are multiple pieces that I think we cover that will answer some of these questions as well. But the parent communication piece was really important. When I said a student won't be pulled from gifted and talented, that's without parent that's something that we want to make sure we have parent consent for. So because if a parent doesn't want their child in gifted and talented, by no means are we going to force them into gifted and talented.
Go ahead, Michelle.
One of the things that is sometimes missed is that a student who is gifted may present very differently. And so if I'm looking at the teacher observation survey, is that where as a teacher, a classroom teacher, I might be looking at a child who's very disengaged, who's always wandering the classroom, maybe talking all the time and not engaging? Is that?
Absolutely, and actually, Dr. Langenfeld, it could be any teacher in the school that knows the child well.
Right.
So any teacher working closely with the child and knows the child well, you're exactly correct. There are sleepers. They're there and they're not engaged, and we need to tap them into their academic needs or their learning needs.
I think of a student that a couple of years ago who was at one of our schools who they were considering identifying for special needs. And when somebody figured it out, and the student actually skipped a grade, extremely bright, but they could have missed that because sometimes the child does not present, they present not being able to follow rules, and because they're
I'm sorry,
needing that support.
I just would like to make mention that often districts in a service model have X number of staff, and so teachers want to help all children. So with good intent, they probably felt that they could service more children in this type of model. However, we know that it is not the strongest model for the children who are gifted, truly gifted, stay in their line, stay in their area, in their program that builds upon itself over multiple years. So in fairness, and I don't know if it's fairness I want to say, we do the best we can with what we have and what we know at that time. And knowing the individuals that I work closely with now, I can honestly say that their intent was to service as many children as they could service at that time. We know different, we know better, so we make changes.
Mm-hmm. I also want to say, Dr. Wagner had brought up before making sure that we're identifying students with linguistic differences, and Dr. Langenfeld was discussing how we're wanting to make sure students that are disengaged are screened and considered as well, because some students might be considered for special education or things of that nature. We also have students that have twice exceptional status who may be in special education but also be gifted and talented. And so this is, again, for those students as well, it allows us a finer filtering piece that allows us to look for all students and not miss students who may have multiple needs that need to be served.
And so with that in mind, the identification process will have the screener that we will administer. That data will help us to build our district baselines. We'll also work with Gwen on the previous data that we might have, that we have a baseline data in which we can measure against. As we move forward, the more data that we get, the more diagnostic that will be, and the greater intentionality we'll have in providing the just right service for those children. So students who do meet, and Mr. Magus did address some of these pieces, so I'll just quickly go over them. Students who do meet the district's identifying criteria will qualify for gifted education programming. A continuum of services will be considered and matched to the student's unmet learning needs. This will be done through, again, the learning support team process with input of all stakeholders. Once identified, the student will retain the status of giftedness throughout their education in the Green Bay Area Public School District. So once they're in, they remain in. Okay? A key piece as we move forward is, in all of our work, is the communication. The key piece in this gifted program moving forward is really that shared ownership for the student's learning. So I mentioned a few times the learning support team procedures and processes. It wouldn't matter which school in our district a child would be attending. They have the same process for entry into gifted services, and they will have the same accessibility to the menu of services that and continuum of programming services that the district provides. So your demographic location has no barrier on what you will have available to you. And I'm sure that you're sensing when we think about the pathways that we're building in our district, when we talk about meeting our visual and our fine arts gifted children, we will start building those communications and relationships with those other departments to have the pathway for those children gifted in those areas to access what systems and programs the district has in place already, but match the student to those rich programs. So really using our entire school system to launch our program forward. I'm sorry.
Nancy, does that mean that not every gifted and talented child, if I didn't want my child to go to Da Vinci but chose to keep that child in their neighborhood school, then the needs of that child would be met at the neighborhood school?
I cannot guarantee you that it'd be met at the neighborhood school, but what the team would look at would be the continuum of services throughout the district that are available to that child. If they could match, and the parent and the team, the school team, felt that this is meeting that student's needs, it could very well be at the student school. It's really dependent on each individual student and their needs. The parents also, as we move forward, will have to sign in order for their students to take additional assessments. So after the screener, they will be given a passive notice that their child will be screened. Then any assessment beyond the screener, the parent will have to sign For those assessments, we have a form. They simply just give us permission to administer additional tests. So the parents know what assessments we're giving, and then they will have the results of those assessments reviewed with them after they're completed. At that time also, that's a new piece that will be added, is the parents have that opt-out right. So your student may qualify for gifted education, but the parents will have a right to opt their child out. Let's say, back to Dr. Wagner's question, if they're in second grade and didn't want giftedness or weren't quite there yet, gifted education, but now in fourth grade, and let's say your son or daughter, you chose not to have them in the gifted program, but they're in fourth grade and they had met the criteria, then we would just ask that we have the additional assessments needed to make sure the programming for that child would be appropriate. So once you opt the child out, it's not a life sentence. If they meet the gifted criteria, they can enter the programming at any time. And then
Excuse me if I may,
You bet.
a little spin on that would be that I, at this point in time, I don't want my child in the program. Does that mean that, a couple questions here, the child is no longer considered, would not be considered gifted? That's one question. And the next question would be, the following year, if the teacher and others, hey, he really, your child really needs some, tongue-tied here, the student really needs some assistance from GT to be beneficial. Do we recontact the parents, or we just say, no, they said last year they didn't want the child in GT?
it's always important to recontact the parent. If we are focusing on what's best for the student, the parent still could opt out and say, I'm not interested. If a student meets the criteria but the parent chooses to opt out, there will still be a personalized learning plan developed for the child, but the child would not be identified for gifted. So the child may be receiving additional, not so much services, but in the universal.
The universal teacher would be thinking about different ways to
Yes.
modify the instruction so that it would best meet the needs of the kid or the student. However, I would say if a parent put in a request to never have their student identified or never contact us again about the GT programming, then we would honor that request as well. But I think it's important as students develop over time and mature and their learning emerges in different ways, we want to make sure that when possible that we're contacting parents back about what options might be out there to best serve their child.
Another key piece is parents will be notified of their students' progress 3 times a year, as often as the standard report cards would be going home. So in elementary, that's 3 times a year. Secondary has agreed that 3 times a year, if a child is identified in gifted education, that the parents will receive a progress report of the progress the child is making. Program accountability. Any other questions? To ensure student growth as evident by reliable measures, provide consistency in student identification and programming, to ensure predictability regardless of what school the child might be attending, allow for collective decision-making, and to ensure that limited resources are used most effectively and efficiently. Those are the whys behind why we need program accountability. And participation in district and school professional learning, all of our gifted and talented resource teachers and those affiliated with gifted education will participate in all our schools' district professional learning. It's difficult to add tier 2 and tier 3 interventions if we don't have a depth of understanding of what's going on in our general education classrooms. We're not sure what we're building on, and it makes it very difficult to have diagnostic intervention at that time. We are also have clearly defined the roles. Everyone is very much needed in our district to ensure that we don't overlap roles. If we have certain teachers and coaches or interventionists that are already providing services, then the gifted and talented resource teachers would be bringing an additional resource. So that we take our limited resources and we make sure that they align with what the needs throughout the district might be, but they all have specific roles so that we're not we always say stepping on each other to accomplish the goal. We have defined roles, but all shared responsibility. Process for recording and monitoring. This will all be kept in Infinite Campus, and also we'll be using the personal learning plans in which we'll be developing the students' differentiated learning plan right within IC, so that teachers who share the student have access to the growth the child's making in their academic area. And then, as I alluded to before, it's very critical that as we move forward that we align our program with all the other district programs to maximize these systems attributes to help all of our learners. So that to make sure that we are also held accountable, the Department of Teaching and Learning has identified the following goals as we move forward. We will be utilizing the district-identified assessment systems to identify students for gifted services and programming. We will use the multi-level systems of framework as a formal process for monitoring student placement, student growth, student learning, parent communication, and parent involvement. We also will develop a continuum of services over this next year that are based on the student data that we gather with our new data collection systems and meet the needs of our Green Bay Area Public School gifted and talented learners. And then, as I mentioned before, each student in gifted education will have an individualized learning plan. Even those that do not qualify but are on the cusp will also have a learning plan developed, so that we are meeting their needs. They came to the table because a need perhaps wasn't being met. We don't send them away without anything because the assessment package didn't provide enough of that information or didn't give us enough of what that child might need. So in other words, even if a child does not qualify, we will be responsible for meeting the unmet learning needs that brought the child in the process forward to begin with.
Nancy, one of the terms on here, something that those of us working in education are very familiar with it, continuum of services. Would you spend a couple minutes explaining that in general, and then what it means specifically to the families, the kids who are identified with GT services here? What does that mean? What does it look like?
So a continuum of service could be from, and I'm going to use another special or educational jargon, least restrictive to most restrictive. It's flipped in the gifted world. So when our children are in for instance, a gifted program or an accelerated learner, their intent is never to get them back to the universal. That is their universal. That is their plan and educational pathway. The continuum of service will be whatever that child, to the degree that child needs to have a service provided or an intervention provided to meet their unmet needs. It could be as much as an additional guided conference or guided reading group right within the universal, small group right within the universal with other gifted and talented students that are alike, peer alike, all the way to a grade acceleration or a placement at a Tier 4 school such as Da Vinci, where the child would be there over a period of time with significant changes to the curriculum. Some children, gifted children, may prefer or feel uncomfortable with a different environment. So that needs to be considered when developing your continuum of services, that you have offerings that would occur at every individual school, not causing the child or having the child to have an environmental change, but just a curriculum change.
And it's fair to say, you spoke earlier about roles and there's roles and responsibilities vis-a-vis service to the student. It's fair to say then that as we're looking at the continuum of services, we're not talking strictly or even primarily about the fact that we're going to be taking a child out of the regular classroom and working with a GT resource teacher. Can you speak to that a little bit more, please?
That is exactly correct. It would be from what could be provided, and you rule out what can be provided in the universal setting or in general education by just differentiating to a higher level, to if the child has greater needs, to being pulled out of the classroom for a particular project, that they're going to extended learning on or a small group. So yes, there's your least restrictive would be to stay in the classroom and to get your needs met by differentiating instruction. The minute we start taking the child out of the environment, your continuum of services is becoming more restrictive.
I would say as well with that concept of continuum of services, that really we want to expand the capacity within the university or within the universal to reach the broadest band possible. So, I mean, hypothetically, we could get to a point where we wouldn't need a gifted and talented program if the regular classroom teacher could meet the broad range of every student in the class. Same with special ed or ELL for that matter to some degree. If we can broaden the abilities of all of our teachers to meet the needs of all students in the class, hypothetically you could meet all the needs. I think that's a far stretch. We do need those services at this time, and that's why we're not in favor of disbanding gifted and talented at this time. We think it's still an important piece to meet the specific needs of a group of students who don't always have their needs met within the classroom, despite great efforts and abilities of the teachers we have there. It's out of the normal breadth of where the students are, and we want to make sure that those outlier students are served as they need to be.
And a piece that we haven't had in place, back to the continuum of service, is really that rich data. We have to know what population and what our student learning needs for our gifted learners are in the district, and then you begin to build. You can't build it all. You build what's needed immediately and get those pieces in place, and then every new learner brings a new piece to the continuum of services. So there's an option and varied options for children to meet their just right need.
A couple of comments, if I may. We learned years ago in special education that jumping right away to pull in youngsters out of a classroom to serve them turned out not to be in their best interest. And I hope we'd be careful here also, and by your comments, I think you will be aware of that. I would hope in a continuum there's also a place for the GT teacher to come into the regular classroom, assist the kids there so they don't have to be out. And a third comment, I would hope you look at this at a later date. I've been aware of at least one school district, elementary-wise, they have mathematics at the same time every day, so the youngsters could much more readily move up and down to different settings to take care of their math needs, whether or not they're identified as gifted and talented or not. So, I mean, it's just something I would appreciate you looking at later on. Thank you.
And that is something I brought forward to the team for further consideration. We're beginning to examine it in greater depth. There had been some interest in that already, but we want to make sure that we look more deeply into that.
I had a question come to me that regarding a 5th grade math placement testing, and if they score really high, then what happens in 6th grade? Is that like a gifted and talented? All of a sudden you have a 5th grader who's really a high achiever in math. Does that roll over into 6th grade where you address that and increase their learning?
Absolutely. That has been a past practice and implemented some years ago in the Green Bay Area Public School District prior to the Common Core State Standards. Since the adoption of the Common Core State Standards, many of the standards that we once taught in 6th grade are not taught in 5th grade. And now that that transition has occurred, we have new resources, we've adopted the Common Core State Standard. That doesn't mean a child could not be accelerated. It simply means there will not be a high stakes test to determine whether or not a child will be accelerated. Again, we will go back to that philosophy of multiple assessments that really paint the picture of that child. We will never use just one assessment to provide any programming on the continuum of services. But that was when I dug in the research of that. That is why the district had chosen to put it in place, because it overlapped. It's pretty much an outdated practice. It is not necessary and will no longer be moved forward or be used as part of our gifted programming.
Thank you.
So in 2017, quickly, we're going to implement that screener and active comprehensive identification progress by the fall of 17 finalized service manual guide, and it's actually our gifted plan that we'll be bringing. Hopefully by the end of October is our target date. By the spring, we would like to communicate a recommendation of service delivery changes moving forward. That continuum of services, there'll be some pieces we definitely want to bring forward as part of our next progress monitoring review, and communicate a process for evaluating overall program success. So we will be looking at how we can build in, is what we're doing working, and how we can continually modify or make it better, or preserve the pieces that are the golden nuggets that are going to be our foundation. And at this time, we'd be more than happy to take any additional questions. And I apologize for the length. I've exceeded my 30 minutes.
We contributed.
We contributed greatly to that.
But with very gifted questions.
Go ahead, Chris.
At least one more comment. I appreciate what you're doing. It's been much needed. I think this should answer a lot of questions we have from community members, and as you said, it's a work in progress. We just don't want to lose sight of it and not review it for another 5 years, obviously. And you have many things to look at. So again, I do appreciate it, and I have one more comment, and I lost it. The individual plans. I appreciate you moving in that direction. I think they'll help clear up a lot with communication with parents. If you truly follow that model that's already been developed or something close to it in the special services area.
I would also, with this being a public forum, invite other parents if they have questions or concerns. We're always very open to input, thinking of our customers as our most important clients along with our students. We want to make sure that the model is best serving them. So when we had some parent concerns, we reached out and had multiple meetings, and we want to make sure that if there are other parents out there that have particular questions or concerns or things that they have as far as ideas to bring forward, they might actually align with great next steps. And so we encourage the others to come forward to us as well. Dr. Lincoln.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Just as a follow-up too, I would assume that you'll be doing some sort of survey and data gathering from the parents as well. So that would be part of something you could keep the board apprised of, to let them know, so that it doesn't happen like Dr. Wagner mentioned, 5 years from now you look again.
Yes.
So that would be an important part of that.
Who is on the Gifted and Talented Advisory Council?
There are 21 individuals, and so I'm not going to get all of their names right, but
Was
there's.
it in the memo?
It's on that, it's in the memo, they're listed in the memo.
It actually,
All right.
the advisory, thank you for this question, because it actually was the stakeholder group that met with Scott Peters.
Okay.
And we've taken that group, and some folks have left the district or have other responsibilities in the district, but we have building principals on that, from our from our arts and from our music department. We have all of our GTRTs, those that are involved in gifted education, special education, ELL. It has a breadth of membership. What we hope to do once our plan is foundationally adopted, we would like to add parents to that advisory group. Right now, we feel like we need to get a plan to you first before we go too far out with it. So, but the goal within the next 2 years, by 2018-19, as we come here next year, we'll be bringing that forward. If there's a board member that would like to be a member of that would be very welcomed. So if you're interested we're just determining when that will be, a Tuesday or Thursday. I can get the dates to you if you're interested. The team is choosing which date works best for them.
So the memo has the planning team. Is that the same as your advisory team? Probably. There's 16. Yeah, that's why it's.
Yes, there's others that have come
That
on
have
as they
added,
leave
okay.
the district, or new people come into a department, they have to send me names. So we figure we're going to end up with almost 21 members of that.
Okay.
And they will be those that will be looking through our plan, our written plan, and providing input to what the GTRTs in the group has done prior, to make sure that we have the best we can bring forward.
I count 8 resource teachers, is that?
That's correct.
Can you give just sort of a general idea of when you talked about progress monitoring and assessing students once they're in the gifted program in terms of their academic progress? In general, how do you pick those assessments and how do you choose how to assess them? Because obviously they're above grade level, so are you just pushing them into the next grade, or anyway, just talk about that a little bit.
Depending on what the intervention would be and what the, I don't want to say activity, the intervention or the teaching would be, if we're going to teach to it, there must be, you have to assess first before you teach. And so the assessment has to match what it is you're teaching for, which would be the child's needs. And there are assessments that measure continual learning. We think of all the assessments we take to go to college and the courses that, more complex courses that we've taken that have measurable measures in it. This will help us to make sure that we're just not choosing activities, but it's a well thought out intervention with measurable goals and outcomes, which will be included in the personal learning plan.
Okay, thanks.
So the STAR assessment, for example, is something that once you get up to the higher ranges of performance, it becomes less useful as a tool for measurement. So we're using other tools at that point.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Just an observation, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this, but the whole word gifted, there's a kind of a burden about that word. And parents, how do you convince parents who are determined that their child is going to be gifted to talk about their academic experience in a careful way that doesn't put that burden on children, so that as they adapt and grow, they aren't weighted down by that label?
2 points. We always focus on what the student can do and celebrate what they're good at. The second piece that we would want to ensure that just because they didn't meet a criteria or a label doesn't mean that there is not enrichment opportunities for this child, destination imagination. I mean, there are still opportunities outside of the gifted program that all of our children should have accessibility to if they would want. So, go ahead.
I was going to say as well, I think that when we see the results of the screener, it's going to open our eyes further as far as the even more broad range of learners that we have before us in every class. And so if we know as educators that we have multiple students in our class who might have needs that are exceptional around being an advanced learner, which is another term that some districts use, looking at advanced learner versus gifted learner, that when we recognize that, we'll focus more of our efforts towards meeting the broader range of needs of students, as opposed to thinking most everybody's in the middle and a few people are struggling, so let's meet the needs of those kids. It's important for us to broaden our perspective of as far as the range of needs within the classroom.
So to really focus the parent talk with the child is to celebrate all they can do and all of the other extensions that they would have available to them.
Okay.
And I think a little bit in follow-up to her question, in terms of once you're identified as gifted, the burden of that and always having to perform, and then you hit a spot in your life where you find things that you're not good at, and it becomes a crisis for you if there hasn't been the appropriate conversation around what that means. And I'm just curious if you've spent any time, or if not, the Carol Dweck's Mindset book talks a lot about giftedness and how to talk with kids who are gifted to prevent them hitting that wall that many of them do end up hitting at some point, whether it's in college or 8th grade or something like that. I just thought that was a very interesting perspective on how to help kids not have that be such a burden that they drop out, because the dropout rate for gifted kids is higher than it is for your run-of-the-mill student. So anyway, just a thought of pulling that into the whole conversation around gifted.
And that,
education.
and I guess we're so focused on the academic part, it's the whole child. When they bring the child to the learning support, the social emotional part of the child is critical. So
Right,
thank you for
right.
bringing that up. And that is, the team would then discuss, if the child has any additional social or emotional needs that need to be part of that continuum of service or that program, to make sure that the supports are in place. And again, the GTRT would not potentially provide that, but a counselor, a social worker. So again, tapping our system to meet our learners.
It just seems like sometimes the goals of the parent don't always match the ability of the child.
And I think that that's important for us to address in our careful conversations that we have. I think we really have to think of the needs first of the whole child. Having been a principal of a building that had a school and within a school of the most talented and gifted students in a former district, I sometimes saw a lot of pressure sometimes self-imposed pressure on kids, sometimes some parent pressure as far as that goes, that sometimes resulted in anxiety or even eating disorders or other depression or other issues. And so we want to make sure that, of course, parents are doing that with good intention, wanting the best for their kids, but we want to make sure that we're thinking of the needs of the whole child for every student, no matter what their status is, but particularly the individualized needs of the gifted and talented students that we serve.
Go ahead.
I just have a comment. I took a tour of Da Vinci last year, and one of the things that when I talked to the principal there that I never thought of, and I don't know if the general public really thinks about this, a child may be truly gifted in math, but struggling in language arts. So now you're working with, you're in a gifted and talented program, but you also need help in another subject. You just assume, or some people assume, a child is going to be gifted and talented at everything. And that's not always the case. So it's a dual role there that the teachers play. So I'm so glad that you're addressing that also.
Agreed. And we're seeing the same thing even with behavior. You might see a student who is behaviorally has no challenges in social studies and art and science, but when they get to math class where maybe they struggle, that's where the behavioral issues emerge. So we really want to take a look at the child in a variety of settings, no matter whether it's the academic pieces that we're trying to serve or the behavioral pieces.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next is our Intercity Student Council report. I'll turn that over to Grace.
Okay, hi. So I'll just get right into it. So I'll start out with East. So as you all know, East just got new turf on their football field, and they did play their first game on it on Thursday night, I believe. And
I'm going to go to homecoming.
And they do have their musical underway. Their musical is a chorus line, and so that's really exciting for the music department. And Rhapsody in Red is also having a summer camp to get ready for the competitions that are going to approach very quickly. Their student council also had their first meeting to start preparing and decorating for their homecoming dance, which is going to be the last week of September this year. And lastly, their newspaper is working on their back-to-school issue for all the students. And then West, their stage is getting redone at the moment, as well as their musical theater summer program just wrapped up a few weeks ago. So that's great for the music department. And their new administration is settling in, and they had their first football game versus Seymour. Preble, we won our first football game against Ashwaubenon on Thursday. That was super exciting. Musical tryouts are coming up for our musical, which is going to be Hairspray this year. And yeah, super excited. And show choir also, both of them, Center Stage and Rendezvous, both have dance camp to learn specifically the dances, but also to get accustomed to the songs for the upcoming competitions they have this year. We recently, last week, just had our registration days, so all of the students got their textbooks and schedules, and so now we're all getting settled into things. And our dance team had a car wash yesterday at the bar on Limekiln, and that was a main fundraiser for them to try and raise money for the competitions that they go to and such. Southwest, they also had their first football game versus Pulaski, and they did win. Their music program is trying to raise money with the Stock the Box fundraiser. The Troyettes are working very hard this season, as well as all the other dance teams, to get prepared. And they will also be holding a kiddie clinic on September 15th for 4th and 5th graders. And John Dewey will be having their open house on August 30th. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Next is our legislative liaison report, and is Julie or, oh, Laura's doing it, okay.
Okay, the budget. We're still in a holding pattern with regard to the state budget. It was due on July 1st, but has been delayed due to the inability of the Senate and Assembly Republicans to agree on transportation funding, and there was a bit of a shift in focus with regard to the debate on the Foxconn deal. DPI has indicated that the 2017-19 biennial budget must be signed into law by October 3rd to enable it to certify state general school aid amounts by October 13th of this year. Public schools need to know the amount of state aid in order to set their tax levies by the November 1st deadline. Currently, the Joint Finance Committee is scheduled to meet this Thursday, August 24th, and will take up K-12 education next week. The let's see, the $200/$204 categorical aid the governor has proposed is still thought to be the agreed budget plan. That hasn't changed currently. And as regard to, I'm sorry, yes.
I want to ask you a question about what, in terms of preparing for next year, is there a budget amount we've used to craft the budget we currently have, and then a contingency plan if it's up or down? Are we in holding in terms of not buying anything big? Anyway, just kind of a little overview on how we're managing with that fact
Sure.
that we have no budget.
First of all, we were very grateful and continue to be grateful to our community for supporting our operational referendum. We've talked about it many times, the fact that we would have not been able to add the positions that you're going to see. We've been adding a number of positions to meet the needs of our students this upcoming school year to exceed what we did last year, but it has afforded us the ability. If you recall, we would have cut about $10 million in staffing alone, and that's a lot of jobs. But so looking forward, depending upon what happens, we're very optimistic, obviously. The way that we had set ourselves up well, I think that the positive is, and I'm going to share this with you, is that we were very fiscally responsible last year and really monitored the bottom line so that we wouldn't find ourselves in a place where we would be spending into the fund balance. So we actually have a sizable shift carrying into this year. I think speaking with Angie about it, it was about a $4.5 million surplus that we're carrying into this year. So we have a good margin right now, depending upon what the legislature does. If the governor's budget comes through, we'll be looking at $4.4 million, and that's the $200 and that piece. So that would be very positive. However, because of how we approached the budget last year, being as fiscally sound as we possibly could, we're well positioned moving in this year, regardless of where it lands. Obviously, we want a very positive outcome. And speaking with Senator Olson, I talked to him earlier I don't know if it's this week or last week. I spoke with him about that, and that seems to be holding as well from what they can tell. And I did see Senator Darling interviewed on Sunday on Mike Goucher, and she spoke that they're going to really start moving this budget too, because they want schools to have a clear understanding where their budgets are when they start the school year. So I think there's real interest to move that forward.
Okay,
I don't know, does that answer?
Yes.
Second item is vouchers. You all saw the article on the fiscal impact of voucher funding on public school districts, which was attached and is in Neptune. With regard to vouchers, it is expected that the income eligibility requirements will change, with at least an increase from 180% of the poverty level to 220% of the poverty level. This would not impact the 2017-18 school year, since families had to apply for vouchers last April, but it would have a large impact on our district next year. Currently, vouchers are expected to increase by $218 per year. Pending legislation. On August 3rd, there was a hearing on Assembly Bill 427, which would require DPI to develop a curriculum for firearm education courses to be offered as an elective to high school students. There's been no further action on that. On August 17th, the Senate Committee on Education had a public hearing regarding a number of items, including incorporating financial literacy into the curriculum of public schools, privacy and pupil data, hours of instruction requirements, and summer school funding. And finally, in the national news, the Senate rejected the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, and in doing so, saved, for now, current school-based Medicaid services. And that's my report.
Just one of the, let me look at your list. The financial literacy into the curriculum of public schools, I thought we already had that.
We personally do.
Oh, but that's not a state, I thought that was already state mandated. Oh, okay,
Head of the curve.
all right.
Chris, did you have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry, I was looking, Dr. Warren, you're staring at something.
Yeah, I know Nancy's back there talking, so I was.
And I was confirming that it is a pre-K graduation requirement.
But not a state.
Correct.
No.
Huh, okay. I just know that my,
It's not a state.
I'm sure it's not a state.
I'm sure it's not.
I've worked in other districts where it's not.
It's not.
Huh.
It's not.
It's important that we teach all of our learners to be financially
Yeah,
literate,
okay.
so that they can be intelligent.
It wasn't 4 years ago, that much I know for sure.
anyway, go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. If I may go back to the article you referenced on vouchers. In the article, it said despite what the voucher people are saying, that vouchers are not affecting public education financially. I believe it was the Legislative Bureau, nonpartisan group, said it most definitely is, and the information put out by the voucher people is basically incorrect. It does affect our taxpayers. It does affect the amount of money we get to support our students in the public schools.
Just as a follow-up, we actually, it was Vicki Beyer and John Magus and I met with the aide for Mike Gallagher last week? Yeah, it's Monday. Anyway, but we talked about the importance of Medicaid and the impact it would have on our students, and I know that Claudia Henriksen has sent a letter, and he acknowledged that as well. We talked about the importance of continuing funding for after-school programming and how our students had benefited, and really kind of gave him some important background of our students and the services being delivered. But we also talked about, on the national level, the impact of school choice and the importance of public education and the critical part of educating all students and not just some students, and the importance of ensuring that public education has adequate funding, and whether it be through special education and title funding as well. One of the things that was very concerning in our conversation was the impact of possibly not seeing Title II come in. And I think that that's Title II dollars we use for professional development and important supports in our schools, and sometimes materials and things. And the thought behind it was that they would provide more special ed aid and other aids to education and shift those dollars. So it's one of those things that's come through the House side, but the Senate hasn't weighed in at all. So we're just monitoring it. But it was a good start to an important relationship with Representative Gallagher's, his office, so Congressman. So.
Okay, all right, thank you. Next is district events. I don't know if anyone has anything to announce. Okay, go ahead.
Actually, Grace started the conversation, and it reminded me, all of our 4 high schools are participating in, it's Stock the Box for Hunger, and it's a benefit for Feeding America across Wisconsin. And I think one of the things that is important is it's September 23rd at Lambeau from 10 in the morning till 1, and all of our high school bands participate, and so they have an opportunity to win scholarships and grants for their schools. So the first place group gets $2,000, and then the grants for the other 3 programs for just participating is $1,000 grant each. But each band comes out, and it's a really fun time out there. People stop by with non-perishable items. We're actually, during our back-to-school welcome, encouraging all of our staff when they come for the back-to-school convocation to bring a non-perishable food item for this effort, but really to try to, I know last year Preble High School went out, it was a little later. This one is on September 23rd, but what they did is they put it all over Facebook. They got the drum line out there, and they went trick-or-treating for non-perishable canned goods, and teams were out, and they did really, really well. So I think that was one of the things that defined them. They really made a real concerted effort, and they did win. So anyway, we look.
And what time is it?
What happens is it's like Battle of the Bands out there.
Okay.
But many of the times they play many of the pieces together. It's from 10 in the morning till 1. And
In
so,
the parking lot?
In the parking lot. Yep, it's hard to miss
Okay.
when you see, and everyone has their band colors on, and they have a really good time. The kids do as well, because all the bands play several pieces together, but they really had a great time out there. But again, the community is welcome to come on out and enjoy the music and watch our amazing youth perform, but at the same time, really have a really great cause. And Associated Bank has sponsored that with us and for this wonderful effort. So, and our kids get grants, and it's a win-win all over.
As regards our board goal to get into schools, I've already paid visits to 6 of my 7 schools, just quickly stopping by to say hi to the principals. Have been very, very gracious and appreciative of the fact that we've got those goals. And tomorrow I'll hit number 7, and I just want to put that out there. It's been great. I'm going to stay out of their hair right now where they're getting geared up, but just a half-hour, 45-minute visit, and it was really nice to see their reaction to the fact that we've said that we want to get out there and do what we can on a more visible basis.
Sandy, are we going to get a list of the open house schedules?
It came
Did it came?
in our email.
Oh.
Kristen
It did?
sent it
Oh,
out as a
Kristen did.
media
Okay.
type blast.
Okay, thank you, Kristen.
Better look again.
I'm looking from Sandy, okay.
Thanks.
All right, next we'll go to our system reports. First, teaching and learning facilitated by Katie Maloney.
Thank you, Brenda. We have 2 important discussion items. the last time we discussed Jeff Dickert from CISA 7 gave us feedback from the staff, parent, and community meetings at Washington, and they brought forward 4 themes, including strong behavior plan, communication, transparency, and relationships. And then that was followed by our multi-system level of support for the behavioral education, intervention, and discipline expectations district-wide documents. And there was lengthy discussion, and it was indicated that this is a fluid process. It's district-wide, but there's a lot of flexibility within it to allow schools to tailor it to their specific needs. So.
And then we will also have a behavior work group
That
moving
will
forward,
commence,
that will-
yes, that.
that will begin at some point in the near
Ed,
future.
Laura, and I will be representing the
Right.
board. on
So, and that will become an agenda item, correct? Will we report like we do?
Yeah.
how that works.
I would think we'd
Yeah.
have, a teaching, we'd have a behavior, whatever
Yeah,
you
we
want to
would.
call yourselves, behavior systems report.
We'll let you know what we want to call
Yeah,
ourselves.
let us know.
We'll get back to you on
Well,
that.
if it's wide open.
Yeah, we're gonna come up with
We have
something
some
awesome.
measure.
We're
Yeah,
not
we're-
deciding tonight, but just be
We'll
aware.
get to work on that.
All right.
And then we do have an action item, compliments of this evening's presentation.
She's all in the band.
I'm still in the band, the drum line. I would move that, I find it on my paper, here it is, okay. I move that the gifted and talented assessment resources as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Maloney?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Janice?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye.
Whitman?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
And that concludes our report.
All right, thank you. Next is organizational support, and that'll be facilitated by Dr. Wagner.
Thank you. We have nothing this evening under business and finance specifically. And under human resources, a couple recommendations. Prior to that, Mrs. Marsh handed to us prior to the meeting a 2017-18 staffing update. And anybody have any questions on that? Or anything you'd like to show us on that?
Continuing to work on.
Yes. I stopped by here yesterday, and folks are working. All day Sunday they worked. When I signed out at 5:30, 6 o'clock, there were still people working in there, so.
Just that we added some positions, so that is why the numbers look a little different, but we still have 24 classroom positions, but some of them have been added. But we're still offering positions every day, and I just left the board table and hired 2 more people, or left the room and hired 2 more people this evening, and have a call from another one that just came in. So we're really moving fast and getting good candidates still, so. And we may have a special board meeting coming up. You're aware of it, so I would be very appreciative of the special board meeting on Monday to take action, because people are having to give notice at their current school districts. So they would be appreciative of having action taken. Our biggest challenge right now is in the area of special education. You'll see that we have 10 openings. We've had a couple of resignations and a transfer. So that is what we're working on. And we still have the open position at West High School for the AP, and we're working on the other 2. They're being moved forward. And we have 4 positions still open at Washington, which we have possibilities to cover those needs right now.
Any other comments? On your sheet here, you specifically mentioned secondary regular education staff, and perhaps it's there, but I don't see it for elementary or just regular elementary teachers. Is there a line for that?
Regular elementary teachers, yes, they are.
Down at the bottom.
Elementary, down at the bottom. Yes, it is the elementary regular ed 4K 5, and then they are here.
It says a total of 17.
Yes, right there. Mhm.
Where is it? I'm sorry.
It's,
Just regular?
The last one
For
under
K-
educator.
yeah, to
And
grade,
then-
that's to grade 5.
And
there
then
are
some
Oh,
are
seven open.
thank you.
part-time.
Mhm. We added some positions, so that's why you went from 4 to 7.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
yeah.
We
Added
we
three more
we added positions.
today, right? You were adding some.
Well, actually, last week.
Okay.
Today, we added, I think, 1, and
Okay.
we're going to hold, and we have a few classrooms on
We're
watch.
watching and holding, yeah.
And
Hold to
aside
that.
to this, I believe at Washington, one of the new assistant principals will not be able to be there at the start of the school year. Are provisions being made for that?
They are.
Is that something somebody might want to
I
address
know
right now?
John can
Yeah,
address
Mr. Magus can address it right now. I think we have the help is in the room. The answer is in the room.
The answer is in the room, and it's Stephen Miller, who helped out quite a bit at the end of the year. He has a great rapport with a lot of the students and with the staff there at Washington. So on the days that Molly, or that our administrator is not available, we'll make sure that we have coverage there full-time with an additional administrator.
At this point in time, you don't know how long that might be?
We don't. It's hard for us to really say. I think it would, given the sensitivity of the situation, we want to make sure that we have as much coverage as needed, and we're encouraging, as we would in any situation, that the staff member is able to take as much time as
For
is
Mr.
needed.
Miller's sake, I hope there's very good Wi-Fi there.
There is. Mr. Miller just returned from quite a few days in Canada. And
With
he's-
no Wi-Fi.
With no Wi-Fi, so it's a
Yeah,
strange
boy.
situation, but he's ready to reacclimate.
Is it, Mr.
Thank you
Miller,
for that update.
weren't you an administrator at Washington at one point, or no?
It was for 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
I love working with those kids.
Any other questions on the staffing? All right, I'll move on to the recommendations. The first one is that the table of organization be modified to reflect the addition of 1.0 associate director of pre-K 12 teaching and learning, 12 months, salary group 9, and that the associated job description as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Ward?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye.
Janice?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Wagner?
Aye.
Dorf?
Carried 6-0.
And the next recommendation is that the transfer of Jane Delcor, Coordinator of Literacy Intervention at District Office, 12 months, to Associate Director of Pre-K 12 Teaching and Learning, 12 months, effective August 22nd, 2017, as presented, be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Wagner?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Ward?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Janice?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
And Jane is on a road trip with her mother, otherwise she would have been here this evening.
Last recommendation is that the consent items as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
McCoy?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Ward?
Aye.
Maloney? Janice?
Aye.
Wagner?
Aye.
Carried 6-0. Our closed session has been canceled, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We'll have a closed session.
Thank you.